that briefly. And concerning data, I know that, and even with every other thing that involves security, you can only protect what you know, right? So with data, if you do not have proper classification, how will you be able to apply your security controls to prevent the cyber risk? So a point where I consider, and in addition to what Rotimi said, you have the right data governance strategy is when your data governance strategy is all encompassing, right from the generation of the data to how it's being processed, what it's being used for, up until its destruction. And this clearly applies to how you have classified your data. So for instance, you classify public data, sensitive data, private data. How you treat each of these data really depends on the classification you have given it. And an exposure of a public data has less risk because it's already public than any information that is classified sensitive. So the moment you're able to do that very well, proper classification with proper application of security control, then I can see you are mitigating your cyber risk. Well, thanks.
Yeah, just to add to what Sharifat said, I like to take my clients through the data lifecycle where you talk about how they create data, store data, use, transfer that data, archive, destroy that data, and for each of those steps on that cycle, the question you ask is, do you know where that data is? Do you know who needs access to it? Do you know if it needs to be have you classified that data? And then at that point, once you've gone through that cycle, that gives you a better idea of what your data governance strategy should be from a cyber risk perspective.
Awesome.
All right. So in addition,
okay. So if I may add, sorry. So a question might be, so how do you know which data is critical? Like, how can you, in classifying your data? So a tool that always worked for me is having an application criticality matrix set up. So you have your inventory, a list of all your applications that you store data and you use to transfer or operate on data, and that would define which data is critical, which data is less critical. So you can have it in 3 to 4 stages and say, for your most critical data, okay, so you must have real-time replication running, for example, you must ensure encryption during transfer. So you put all your effective controls on your most critical data, and then you streamline down, especially if you're looking at it from a budget point of view, that I can't apply all controls to all the data I have. So you have a criticality matrix, and then you now know which ones are the most critical to attend to and which ones you don't mind, if at all, is actually required or that importance to use. So the criticality matrix helps, and then it helps you, I think it's maybe a cost-effective way of classifying your data and then knowing how to manage. And as you grow, some data would move, some applications will move from being less critical to critical. At that point in time, the data becomes very critical, and then you can apply effective controls.
Okay, great. I think Mr. Kimpeli wanted to also add something there.
Okay, like I don't know whether you can hear now.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, right. So in addition to what my other colleagues have said, Sharifat and Balabo, I think to me, data ownership is very, very key. So at the particular point, when it gets to a particular point where you are able to assign an owner to different categories of data, so I think that's at that point in time, data governance is very, very, very important, because if you are able to assign maybe an ownership, different owners for different categories of data, the ownership of the data will be able to tell how critical the data is. So you now be able to define what are the level of protections, what are the level of control that needs to be put in place. And we have different levels of data protections, whether you want to apply the data leakages prevention, whether you want to apply data encryption, whether you want to apply the it depends on the data that you are protecting yourself. When we have different structure, different levels of data, we have a structured data and unstructured data. So I think ownership is very, very key. You need to define the data ownership, then definitely the data privacy engineer or whatever need to work with the data owner to be able to ensure the level of control that needs to be put in place. So for that governance part of it, ownership is very clear. Thank you.
These are all very, very strong points that have all been mentioned. And if you were taking notes, there's quite a lot that has been said. But just as a summary, knowing what you're protecting, classification of those assets, knowing what those assets are is very, very key. And of course, providing layers of security, depending on the level of classification and the type of data that is being stored is very essential to ensuring that there's data governance. So someone also sent this question in saying in module 4. Okay.
If I may just add one point, because I think what was shared is very useful, and it goes towards the details as well. But one way maybe I can think about the summary is to say the strategy is supposed to help you identify a problem efficiently and fast. So the real, maybe one simple way to answer it is to say, how quickly can you tell when something goes wrong? If you can identify the risk fast, then your strategy is good. If you cannot, then you need to look at any possible lessons learned or any possible improvement. You might go for consultancy to improve either the way you deploy your strategy or maybe changing the strategy itself. Another way to look at it, and I have been in talks with some companies who like this approach too, in addition to risk, if you have good governance strategy, you will actually save money in the sense that you will have less duplicate and redundancy in your data. If you feel that this is the case, this is another indicator that your governance is actually doing well.
Awesome. So time to identify, if there's an incident or there's an anomaly on your network, is also a sign of whether or not the strategy is strong. Thank you so much for your input there. We had this question coming, and I'll be putting Omo on spot. But if anyone else has something to chime in, you can always speak. So the person says in module 4, there's a sample cloud security architecture. Please explain how that particular security architecture works.
Okay, thanks, Confidence. That architecture, that example that I used in the module that I delivered was basically a generic security architecture based on a 3-tier web application where you separate the presentation layer from the application layer from the data layer. And there's so many patterns. If you're working with, say, AWS, for example, or Azure, they have so many patterns available that show you different scenarios of how you can secure a web application, in this case, a 3-tier web application. I only added a 4th layer for threat protection. And there I would include things like my AWS threat detection, threat prevention components. I would put any load balancers and any other sort of front-facing security prevention measures in that 4th layer. But other than that, it's a basic 3-tier web application security architecture. The only thing I'll add to that is that when thinking about designing security in the cloud, I always like to start, where possible, I always like to start from developing a threat model and then just talk the solution architect or the project manager through the typical threats that we would expect to find for that particular solution, trying to understand what they want to achieve, identify the threats, and just work through the different trust boundaries that exist across the flow of data in that solution, and then build an architecture around that knowledge. But like I said, AWS, Azure, Google, all the major providers have patterns available that anybody who's looking to develop a secure architecture can leverage.
Great. I hear you there very strongly around threat modeling and being able to foresee those possible threats and use that as you design your cloud architecture, a secure one at that. Thank you so much. Mr. Moore. So I'm going to go on to another question we received, not from your module though, but this is a generic question. I think this is someone that actually services an SME, because the question is typical to what's available in Nigeria. And this person says, in a situation where security incident occurs, how should the IT personnel respond without having a team to assist at all levels?
For security incidents, you don't have to rush into things. Once you notice something, you have to go cool, you don't go hot level headed into an incident response. You have to take time to understand what incident you're responding to. And sometimes you don't pull the plug or let the attacker know that you're aware of the person in the situation, depending on what type of attack it is. If it's a malware attack, you will want to disconnect from the network so as to prevent it from spreading to other systems on the network. And then you also want to ensure that, I know it requires lots of technical skills, but it's also knowing when you require external help and what you can solve internally as well. Also trying to ensure that you limit it spreading to other systems or across the network, and trying to resolve it as much as you can, and identifying that at this point you need help, external help that you don't have, and seeing who you can assist, who you can call or ask for help from to assist you in the incident.
Yeah,
so maybe I should, so to support what Simi has said, I think the easiest way is have an incident response plan. So from what I hear from the question, I think you're trying to run a lean team. So you don't want to involve too many people, or you're probably the only IT personnel. So how do I react? Have a plan that you've rehearsed, and or you should work with an external consultant to achieve. So the question will now be, okay, in the case of this kind of incidents, what do I do? Who do I talk to? Who do I engage? What part of the network should I go to? What part of the system should I check? So having that plan helps you not panic when an incident happens, and you move to the plan quickly. So you pull it out and then you look at what do I do? Then what do I do next? So, and while at it, you might not need the plan to, depending on the kind of issue, but like Simi had mentioned, you don't need to panic. And when you are not just sure, just go to your plan. So you know what you need to do first, and then you move on to the next stage. So this is not being too technical, but just have a plan and put all that information in your plan and then try to follow up with the plan.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is assign leadership. Somebody has to be the leader in that situation, who then directs the team to go to the plans that you've rehearsed, you've developed. So again, non-technical answer, leadership is important in this situation.
Okay.
If I might add, there can be a difference between the roles in an incident response plan, because I completely agree there is clearly a plan missing here. But even if you don't have enough resources, manpower, that doesn't mean you don't start having at least a basic plan with a number of roles. It is okay if one person is going to have 3 different hats: the guy who talks to the media, the guy who is the technical, and maybe the person who do some paperwork. But at least they will follow a procedure. Without a procedure, things, I'm afraid, will be quite messy and cannot be quantified in terms of risk. The beginning has to be with a plan, even if it is a basic one.
I totally agree with all of the points that have been raised. So just to summarize, having a plan is very important, whether or not it's basic. Don't go into the situation, panicky and all afraid, because you might take irrational decisions. You might end up, spilling some more milk, and making a mess of an already messy situation. It's also important to know, if I get my Nigerian side up right now, to know which one pass you, and get some external help, when necessary, particularly since you're running a really lean one-man team, if I understand. Another very key thing is to have leadership involved. I mean, from the day one of the key things that we have taught earlier on in the trainings is that you have to have top management buy-in on what you're doing. So as you're working, take your CEO along, take whoever you're reporting to along, and if it's possible, have your top management, like the Oga of the Ogas, knowing what you're doing. Carrying them along can be a great way to be able to, shout and say, I need help when necessary, and you'll be able to get their attention and say what you have to say around these incidents and what you need. Okay, so I'll move on to the next question, which is around sensitive data. So the person is asking here, with more businesses uploading sensitive data across data centers, how can we ensure privacy and integrity of our data in the cloud? Omo can go, head on with this, and anyone else can just chime in as well. Sure, we have a lot of people with privacy and cloud competence here.
Okay, I'll just start by saying for many organizations, shadow IT remains a problem. And this is, where different business functions decide to spin up cloud services or pay for cloud applications without going through, the necessary due diligence with IT and security. So start by solving the shadow IT problem. Start by trying to identify who's using what data they're sending out to the cloud, why and how. Once you've identified that and sorted that problem out, I think the next thing would be to consider, going back to the earlier question about, data classification, the earlier comments about data classification, based on the classification of your data, ensure that, you are assigning the right level of security to that data. So where encryption is required, ensure that your data is encrypted as much as possible before it gets into the cloud. I also probably drop a note there about that the shared responsibility model that I talked about in my module, having an understanding of where your responsibility starts and stops as a cloud customer, and where the cloud service provider's responsibility starts and stops from a security perspective is important. That will help you understand where you need to apply your security controls in, as your data is spread across either one particular cloud service provider, or if you're using a multi-cloud situation. Again, threat modeling. I'm very into threat modeling these days. And so if you know that your organization is heavily dependent on cloud services, consider investing in an external consultant who can help you build a threat model, so you understand where your data is going, who has access to it, and what controls you need to put in place to protect that data.
Thank you so much, Omo. Simi, do you want to say something?
Yeah, also, as regards privacy, I think it's also important to understand data residency. Obviously, if you put your data in the US, then privacy is, I don't think you expect privacy in that instance, because they have laws that allow government to look through your data in the cloud. Yeah. So understanding data residency, where does your data stay? So you have to understand that even before you put your data in the cloud, you have to understand the rules guiding which country where your data is, so that you have to understand, does it affect your data in any way? If I put my data in the US, I'm not expecting privacy in quotes, because I know that should there come, for instance, in the future, the US government has a right or so to search my data in the cloud. So before you put in the cloud, you know your location of where your data is. And sometimes applications too, you could ask them where their data center is located. So if some applications, some service providers allow you to pick the location where your data resides. And apart from the famous cloud providers like Dropbox and other applications. So you could ask them and ask if perhaps the EU will be a better option for you. So understanding data residency, I think, is also important as regards privacy.
Awesome. Because of time, we're just going to rush. Okay, we can take one more response from Zaki. You want to say something? Go ahead.
I just wanted to add a very small thing, keeping SMEs in mind, because at times their systems are not complicated at all, in the sense they want a good backup. They use the cloud with some popular options. It's just that they want to make sure that access to this data will be easily breached. And there are some software that can come on top of it to provide another layer of encryption. So if they use, for example, a Dropbox or OneDrive, they don't have to share data directly with these services. It can always be encrypted on the fly and then stored on these easy to use, easy to deploy services, sort of speak. But I see these examples a lot from SMEs. I don't want to advertise a particular commercial product. There are a number of options, but in principle, it's encryption before you send something to the cloud. When the business plan and the model is simple, that can be sufficient for some company.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haider. We'll just go with this question here from, I think, also someone who is servicing a small business here. So person is asking that, what are some factors to take into consideration when repairing or replacing an IT asset? So for example, how do we know which asset to repair or to replace?
I can take this. I know I took the module on asset management, and generally, and I'd like to take this from a practical point of view and experience. So it depends on the different kind of assets. So some IT assets are totally out of the organization's control. For instance, the laptops we give to our employees. For a small or medium scale organization, they probably would not have the big assets like the servers and things like that they keep in the organization. Most people will be leveraging on cloud using platforms that already exist. So in that light, some of the assets that you may be referring to talk about the workstations that your employees are using, laptops. It's good to have a fixed life cycle for assets. So I know in the organizations I've worked with, most recently with GSK, we had a 5-year tenure for assets. And we did this in conjunction with finance. So, you know, they get the book value, then they begin to depreciate it. I don't know all of the finance terms, but after 5 years, that asset is regarded as zero value. So, and automatically, the users do not need to ask before we replace those devices, you know, for them. It also applies to their mobile devices. So we had users who had iPads, some had telephones. For iPad, mobile devices, it was 3 years. So we had a fixed life cycle. But however, what do we do to a user that comes up and says, especially with this working from home thing, and says, what's up on my laptop? We are not going to tell him to go wait for 5 years. The user cannot work. So we need to be able to balance. So what we do is we have spare devices so that we can easily replace when they go bad. And then we also make sure we have very tight contracts. Sorry for the background noise, if you can hear, my kids are in class. We also have contracts with our manufacturers. So the likes of Microsoft and their distributors in Nigeria for devices that we can replace if the defect is due to manufacture. So we return it and then they give us a new one. So by and large, have a fixed timeline for life cycle of your devices, which we call tech refresh, and then have backup for the emergencies when they occur.
Okay, thank you very much. With me, you can take 30 seconds, please, to just add something to what Sherifat said.
Okay, just in line with what Sherifat said, I think it's also important for us to analyze and consider the downtime that the assets that you want to replace might cost. So if, for example, I see an asset and I said, this asset, should I really replace or should I repair it? It's going to depend majorly on the criticality of that asset. If you know that this particular asset at this time, you cannot afford to have a very long time, having a downtime with it whenever you have to replace it, then it might be the best option at that time for you to repair it. If, for example, it might cost me like maybe about a month for a new parts to be shipped in, configure, and so I mean, just look at a quick fix so that I would be able to avoid a long time downtime. So they also need to really consider the downtime whenever you are considering that to repair or to replace an asset.
Thank you so much. That's very true, especially in the context of small businesses. There's a question here. I think this will be the question before I asked the last question, because we've run out of time. So the question will be, again, from small business perspective, what are the best defenses against the brute force login attack? Let's put this in a context that I'm imagining this person is asking it from say they have a website that they built in WordPress, for example. So are there tools that can be implemented at the firewall level of the network to help better analyze malware threats? This is the person's question. So it's saying, I'm just going to read it full. What are the best defenses against the brute force login attack? Are there tools that can be implemented at the firewall level of the network to help better analyze malware threats?
Well, I'll just start the response to this one. I think, first of all, understanding how to even detect a brute force attack is the first place to begin, in terms of like reviewing logs to identify what IP addresses those attacks are coming from. Obviously, on your website, you want to ensure that for any login pages, you're limiting failed login attempts, you're implementing account lockout, you're implementing multi-factor authentication. But on the firewall level, you want to use your logs to identify the culprit IP addresses or IP address ranges and see if you can block those IP addresses or IP address ranges. So yeah, it all begins with monitoring and knowing what your logs are saying. With brute force attacks, you always have to, basically just be as responsive as possible. I don't know of any, I'm not going to mention any specific tools here, but I think general practice is to just know where the attacks are coming from and try and be responsive with your firewall configurations as a result.
Great. So if you have any specific questions or suggestions, for any specific questions around tools, we can answer those questions privately. So you can send an email to connect at CyberSafe Foundation, and we'll go as specific as possible. But at the moment, because of this forum, it's not to promote any tool. That's the reason why our faculties are sort of, hush-hush about throwing out any names, because most times it's not even about the tool, it's the practice around using that tool to deliver on what you want to achieve. So if you have any specific questions, please, on what tool you suggest, or we can suggest to you to use for any particular thing, you can ask, and then I'm sure they will be happy to provide answers.
Right.
So
let me quickly chip in one or two things to what Omar Osage said. I think you mentioned failed login attempts for every application, because there is no, whenever you are developing applications, you don't need to wait till when your application is deployed. At least during the development, you must follow the secure coding practice. So make sure that you implement a failed login attempt, So for example, now you can decide whether after 3 or 5 failed login attempts, if you want the users to be logged out temporarily, maybe for 1 hour or 24 hours, depending on the organizational information security policy, you can decide that. You can also make sure that the root account is not being used at any point in time. Then you can also enforce rate limits at your on your perimeter firewalling, or it can be web application firewalling. You can enforce a rate limit. For example, now, if somebody is trying to log on to application, trying maybe 1,000 times within a second, sending a request within a second. So definitely you should be able to know that that's a form of kind of a brute force login attempt. You can enforce that at the firewall level, or maybe web application firewall. I won't mention any web application firewall, and you can also apply your anti-DDoS. You must all the anti-DDoS has the capability to detect a bot. Like somebody can develop a script that will do that, and then the application level, you can also guide against robots from attacking your application. Maybe implementation of a captcha, so that to be sure that it's not human being. So that quite a number of stuff that you can do at the application level, even at the perimeter level. You can implement your anti-DDoS, you can implement rate limits, you can implement set the limit, maximum number of possible attempts, maybe, and all of that. So thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to go on to the last question. We'll all just take 30 seconds to answer. It's a personal approach to something. And we'll all just take 30 seconds to answer, and then we can have maybe one response from someone, one of the beneficiaries here that wants to say something, either ask a question or give a comment really quickly before we close out. We've already spilled past our set time. So the question is, I'll start from Rotimi, and then go to Sherifat, Omar, Zachariah, then go on to Bolagbo, Dr. Heda, Simi will be last. So the question is, sorry. The question is, from personal experiences, please share some patch management best practices, especially for a small business. So patch management, can be a bit of an issue. Again, keeping in mind really lean teams. We've seen typically with a lot of the beneficiaries of this program that a lot of them are one-man teams. We've seen this even in the questions that have been asked. We've seen this in our surveys. So just imagine a one-man team, maybe some IT function somewhere that is not exactly given sometimes so much importance in the organization. How do you manage patches and making sure that patch management is done well, it's not disrupting any business function, it's prioritized and done on time? So what are your personal takes and experiences with patch management? Rotimi, please, you have the floor.
Okay, so for patch management best practices, first, one of what we need to consider has been the basic thing that has been said from the beginning, discover your assets first. So whatever application, whatever tools, whatever system I need to patch, I must even be able to first identify and discover it. So discovering of the operating system that is running in your system, the different services that you run, it's extremely important. Then you may also know how to categorize it and look at what's the level of importance of these particular applications or these tools that I'm using, this operating system that I'm using. So it will help you a lot to be able to know how to run a very good patch management. Later on, you may have to get some software that will also help you with that, to help you monitor different patches and also do some vulnerability assessments on your system. And after that, it's also good when you have discovered that to be able to see how you can configure your management, your patch management. And always ensure that you also audit all this and make a good reporting regarding whatever you have been able to come across. So it's always good for you to first identify it. When you identify it, you categorize it, then use some different tools that are available to help you to monitor, do an auditing of it, and then do a very good reporting.
Great. Sharifat, you have the floor.
Yeah, and so I'm going to try and respond quickly and apply it to small and medium scale. And this is my approach will be quite very different from what most people think. So for a small, medium organization, and even with everything cybersecurity, you need to really value what is your core business need. And I'll presume patch management is not your core business delivery. And for any organization, if it's possible for you to outsource or leverage on existing platform that they do things very well, why not? So I'll assume it's a small organization. Why do you have servers that you need to patch? Why do you have to say leverage on cloud? These people are the experts here. They already do the patch management. Just use their services and pay as you use. Remove that stress of patch management from your part of what you need to do, so that you can focus on your business, on exactly your objective as a business. That said, there may be other organizations that you just cannot outsource. Maybe that's the core of your business and this is what you're doing. But you need to test. You need to properly test. If you have to do the patching yourself, you need to properly test, make sure you do a pilot deployment. So I remember at InterSwitch, my role at InterSwitch, because InterSwitch is highly sensitive. To do a patch management was a big headache. After testing thoroughly, we still have to build a clone of the system that we want to patch and patch it. See that clone is fine before we near production. In some cases, we convert that clone to production before we patch. So patch management is highly sensitive and is an area that I see that if you can just outsource it to the expert, get it out and you use your platform as a service or software as a service, take those additional stress away from you and just pay as you use. So that's my approach. It's quite uncommon. A lot of people feel you have to do it yourself, but no, not for me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sharifat. Omo, you have the floor. I could see you nod at some point there, so yes.
I was nodding because I agree with both Rotimi and Sharifat, especially Sharifat's point about outsourcing. As much as possible, if you're a small business, think lean, think cloud, think outsourcing. That will save you a lot of pressure to respond to patches because you haven't got that time. It's not your core business competency. So yeah, I was just agreeing with both of them.
Okay, thank you so much, Amor. Zakaria, do you have something to say there?
Okay, yeah, I think I concur with everybody. So because I like the way almost Saga just mentioned think lean. So you need to be very proactive whenever you're applying the patch management as very, it seems to be one of these the most easiest stuff to do in cybersecurity. What's the big deal in patching up a system? Just get the latest update, but can be very, if it is not well planned. So what Sharifa just said, that you need to make sure that your patch is well tested. Is another thing for you to test it. Do you really have a real environment? For example, now you can test a patch on a test environment, and the test environment may not be a replica of what is happening on the production environment. And luckily for me, immediately Sharifa left InterSwitch, I stepped on her shoe. So I will just use InterSwitch. InterSwitch, what we do in InterSwitch, our test our patch, because it's a technology company, a company driven by technology. What we do, our test environment is as good as production environment, and the company run on 99.99%. But I mentioned it's very easy for us to spring up a server at will. We can easily clone up a server. So while we are testing a patch for a particular, and in InterSwitch, about 4, 5, 8 servers can be running concurrently. While 8 servers are running concurrently, we can spring up 2 other servers and be applying a patch on those 2 servers. And at the same time, we would direct traffic to those servers that have been. So in case if there is any issue, we will see it from we have a very robust knock and SOC center where we see if there's any issue. So if you realize that the 2 patch environment is working concurrently, we just convert those patch environments to production environment. It's very easier for us. So if you have been driven by the technology, leverage on virtual technology, you can easily clone up a production environment and choose it to test your patch, and you can direct traffic. So if you are running on high availability, you can direct traffic to those production environments, and you see whether you are getting it right or not. Because if you don't do that, you might think that your test environment is working fine, and the test environment may not be the exact replica of what's running on production environment. You might run into trouble, and you wouldn't want to run into that kind of a situation. So you need to apply cautious, and you need to also apply the lean IT principle. So if you don't have the technical capability to run a high availability system, so you can call a friend, or you can engage a consultant, or you can engage. There are so many people that are into this space that do manage security services as a platform. I know that Kolabo will be so happy to assist you in any small scale organization that want to do that and all of that. So thank you.
Thank you for selling Balabo's market.
Exactly. Okay, so it looks like that question will go around. So I'm going to ask one more question that I was going to let go of because of time, but we would have those questions and closing remarks answered by Bulabo, Dr. Hader, and Simi, so we can close that. We can take a picture and then close out. So what from the person's question there is what intrusion type have you encountered the most? So what type of intrusion have you encountered the most in your career? Again, if you have something to say, please be on standby, raise your hands up so I can know that I would allow one person to give a comment that hasn't given a comment before, once we have all of the faculties share their thoughts on this last question. Bulabo, you can go.
So, so I think for me, as a system administrator, so I have pursued viruses and malware across the network. I remember the time I worked at maybe I shouldn't call the name of the company. So I worked at a consulting firm where we had like a viral attack, and I literally was going from system to system. It was like reproducing itself and moving across systems. And for me, it was a bit exciting, but time was short, and I needed to fix issues. I needed to get systems back up. For me, so that was the first stage. The next was I wouldn't say I was a victim, but I had to play the role of doctor to the virus called Conflicker. So I was in an environment where we had conflict attack, and it was brought in from another environment. So the intrusion was, I would say the intrusion was human-made, in the sense that someone brought in a flash drive from another environment, a client's environment, and brought it back to the provider's environment. And then we had to spend, days and almost weeks hunting it down. So, and it involved tracking down these systems, putting them into quarantine, working with malware removal tools, different tools, which one would work. And back in the days, it's not like now where you have so many tools to work with. So we had to explore, we had to try and error, we had to be almost manual. So back end for me was a bit exciting because I got a bit practical beyond just installing antivirus and expecting it to catch the virus. Now you've actually been infected and you need to be able to track it down. So, but what I learned from it is being able to plan, which is know the parts of the network, identify your systems, be able to put them into quarantine, lock them down, and then be able to clean them and put them back on the network. So that was it for me.
Awesome, thank you very much. I was knocked out there by the network, but I'm glad that we kept the conversation on. Simi, do you want to share your own experiences as well?
I think based on where I work and where I stay, one of the common things I've seen so far is business email compromise. And I regret saying this because we're Nigerians, but many times, I wouldn't say they're Nigerians, but many times the IPs are from Nigeria. I'm not saying Nigerians are doing it too, but many times you find out that the IP addresses are from Nigeria, and my colleagues are like, "Oh, it's Nigeria again." It's a bit embarrassing, but that's what I can say. I won't say it's Nigerians that are doing it too, but the IPs are from Nigeria.
We understand you.
Thank you for staying patriotic.
Where I am now,
I
think Nigerians will fear the Indians.
Yeah.
In my terrain, yeah, the Indians are, oh my God. I wonder, I think, anyway, comment.
Okay, so different terrains, different structures. Okay, yeah. So Rotimi, you've spoken, right? Rotimi, have you shared your...
Okay, oh, you want me to share experience regarding this too?
Yeah, I'm wondering if we've already touched base with you.
Okay, so regarding this, what really will I say? I think I also agree with what Simi also say. In fact, most time when we check the threat vector, when we check the attacks that comes in or originate from different countries, it's really unfortunate that we see a lot of that coming from Nigeria and there. Just like what Sharifa was also saying too, for some times we see more of the Indians taking the lead, but these days we now see Nigeria really replacing that lead. Though we might not categorically say that this is really coming from Nigeria, but there's surely a reason why this is happening so much, and it's always pointing towards Nigeria. So business email compromise has really gone far more than what we really expected to be, and we are not even seeing that to be coming down. Then recently, what some organization might not be aware of is that these days, more of the very reliable or trusted institutions, majorly our financial institution here in Nigeria, the rate in which ransomware attack is coming, it's getting a bit alarming. Some of us might not be aware, but some banks are really being hit, and they may not be able to provide optimum service right now. So let us also know that. And unfortunately, the most interesting thing about it is that it even comes from a phishing attack. So, and it's so surprising these days how people really get into something that we feel that it shouldn't be a big deal, but it's not affecting serious organization. And I think there is a need for also be very cautious regarding this.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Rotimi. We had some feedback on Twitter within the week. Some had just taken the social engineering module and tweeted about it. It's very practical, it's very rich. Please ensure that you pay very close attention to our social engineering module. It's packed that way because a lot of the cyber threats that we've seen around, successful using social engineering. So please pay attention to everything we're teaching in that module. And I would really, really advise that you take a phishing quiz that I'll be sharing a link right now. So make sure you take that phishing quiz. It's going to help you, check how, if you have learned very well from the social engineering module we had earlier in this training. So at this point, if there's no one that wants to give a comment, we'll just all please turn on our cameras and just take this picture. If you can turn on your cameras, your videos right now, so we can all take a picture really quickly. If there's no one else who wants to say something, Ajayi, do you want to say something? You had a question, I think. So, but if you can just turn on your cameras, let's all take the picture quickly.
I have a question.
Okay, Ajayi, make it very short, and we'll have one faculty respond. Go ahead.
Sorry, it's a small question. It won't take time. I want to ask, can we get a room for mentorship? Because what you have taught us, we still have some that might have difficulties. And if it is possible that it happens that we can get a room for mentorship on this platform or a group on WhatsApp, thereabout, that we can communicate all these things. Because we still have some questions because of time. I won't be able to go there again. That's what I want to say.
Okay, that's fine. We'll consider having a group, and we'll get back to you on the ins and outs of that group via email. Just be on the lookout. Watch your mailbox. Will be sending you a lot of resources, from slides to the post-training evaluation to the replay of this webinar to information about the WhatsApp group. So please keep an eye on your mailbox. We'll be sharing a lot of information. Thank you so much. Please, can we just turn on our cameras? Laulu, Divine, Fidelis, Yanda, Adamu, Shoinka. Let's just turn on our cameras really quickly, and then we can take this picture and call it a day. Okay. Yeah, so we have a lot of cameras on right now. We'll give everyone 1 more minute to turn on their cameras if you want to, and we will take the picture quickly. We'll just do cheese like we had in physical camera. We're all in the same space. Okay, so it's time for the picture now. Do we say cyber safe? Let's go. 1, 2, ready, go. Cyber safe.
Cyber safe. Cyber safe. I am is actually very dark.
Okay, great. So I think a couple of cameras have just come on. Okay, let me take more. Let's do one more time. Cyber safe. 1, 2, ready, go. Cyber safe.
Cyber safe. Cyber safe.
Okay, so that picture taken. Thank you so much, everyone, for turning up. We'll be sharing your resources. I want to say thank you so much to our faculties coming for this question and answer session and for answering questions wholeheartedly. Thank you so much, Amor. Thank you, Sharifat. Thank you, Zechariah. Thank you, Rotimi. Thank you, Bolago. Thank you, Simi. Thank you so much, Dr. Heda. We deeply appreciate, and please follow them on social media. On Twitter, a lot of them are on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Follow them on social media, ask them your questions, interact with them. I'm sure a lot of them would like to hear from you. So just interact with them and follow them. They share a lot of resources every now and again. You can keep learning from them. And of course, I want to hear what your experiences are. So tweet about this program, share your comments on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Let's just hear from you and vibe with each other. Have a great weekend.
Doing to us what we were training.
Have a great weekend and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye for now.
All right, bye-bye. Okay.
Bye. Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for an amazing session.
Treatment plot and
Bye.
I've heard some rumors that year or something happened.
I'm so blessed to have you guys. Bye. Thank you so much. The Lord bless you.
Thank you, Felix. Thank you, Felix.